So the PMC's kind of destroyed childhood because it's the time of competition. The working class is the time of deprivation. And so that is another way where we can build solidarity. Like, do you want your kid to be like a slave to testing from ninth grade to 12th grade on? The problem is that the innovations of the luxury of education always say, like, there are always private schools who are like, oh yeah, pay us $55,000 a year and you can like be a free learner and curious. But always at the end, on the at the college entrance level, everyone goes back, snaps back into place in the competition. And there isn't that freedom of exploration or curiosity that we're supposed to prize in children. Someone said, a friend of mine said a long time ago, like, we teach our kids to share until kindergarten. They're all socialists until kindergarten, then they have to become capitalists.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to pull out one thing you said in there. I think this is I think the core insight on what's so important, and something that I hadn't really crystallized until we had this conversation. It is very common in liberal circles to talk about the wages of whiteness and the idea that conservatives are induced into voting against their interests because feeling a sense of racial superiority to the other is enough. That's what they're getting in exchange for cutting taxes on the rich and all the other kind of policies that are priorities of the Republican Party. And it is clarifying for me in this conversation how the liberal version of the wages of whiteness are a certain kind of wages of PMC elitism. And you can buy into these cultural signifiers and you get to belong. And even if you're a poor adjunct professor who makes much less than a union carpenter, you can feel superior because of the degree hanging on your wall, and that you know what kind of foods you're supposed to eat, what kind of elite television programs you're supposed to watch. And, you don't watch Yellowstone, you watch Industry and all of that. Okay. I think that's a really interesting insight. I wanted, as we wrap here, just to ask you about something else that you just said, which is, how do you reconstitute the solidarity between the PMC and the rest of the working class that existed in a kind of 1968 era? What do you do with the knowledge that the PMC are being given these inducements, being dangled these carrots? Obviously, not all PMC, right? Hashtag not all PMC. We're sitting here, we're Bernie people. Bernie was a Bernie person despite his background. What makes us ostensibly, and I'm not saying we're perfect people, I'd be watching Industry, I have my faults and
I consume a lot of content,
but how do you break that inducement of the PMC to fight, against the working class? And is that really what's happening here? Is that the real obstacle? Is it that there's a PMC misalignment at large? Or is it more about these kind of institutional barriers, the embeddedness of certain PMC in the media class, the power of media shareholders to choose the messaging and the messengers, and that even if we flip 99% of the PMC in the right direction, there's still going to be enough, Simone Sanders or whoever it is, that they can give an MSNBC show in exchange for viscerally defending the corporate Democratic Party to this last dying ember. Yeah.
So this goes back to something you said earlier, which is that sometimes I don't think it's going to be a voluntaristic, thing that you and I can do necessarily, but it might be happening with regards to the bubble of higher education, which is that the viciousness of capitalism has made the hoarding of wealth for a certain age group, a certain education level, so extreme that even young aspirational white-collar workers who wanted to become the PMC can't get into it. The student loan debt was predicated on the student loan institution was predicated on the fact that you could find good jobs after, going to law school and going into $250,000 of debt. There are very, very few good jobs now. All the professions are closing down hiring, even though they say like our unemployment level is so low. Like good jobs are very, very difficult to find. And so that layer of the recruiting, of the recruits who are burdened by this incredible student loan debt, their eyes are being opened to how the system is rigged against them. And maybe that, but what I think is really scary about this whole situation too is that when you get this kind of mass disillusionment with the powers that be, you get more authoritarian on top. And that's why I think the liberal authoritarians are even more demanding of conformity to the DNC and the Democratic Party line. And there will always be that level of pundit that you can't compete with because you're not going to say the things that you need to say. But, you know, ... will have like $1 million salary. And I'm not saying you're poor, I'm poor, but we'll never be recruited like that. And then as the younger people get more desperate, those carrots are going to look more enticing. That's this is what's really scary about the whole situation. And it's destabilizing of a democratic polity. Like, if people really cared about democracy, this is not how wealth would be distributed. This is not how education would be configured. But I do think that what you were saying about this mass disillusionment, that could, with higher education, that could turn. But I don't think that's going to dissolve the endowments of Yale, Harvard, or Princeton until there is a government out there who will say private educational nonprofit institutions can't sit on this much money. Do you realize that their movements within financial markets can change all sorts of markets? When the California pension makes an investment somewhere, or the Harvard endowment makes an investment somewhere, they're actors. They're financial actors with educational institutions attached to it. Who's going to come down and be able to dissolve that? Who's going to be able to say, it's going to take a lot of political will that is being drained from us because we feel like we're just trapped in this stasis.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point. I mean, I often say, as someone who climbed to the top of the rungs educationally, if I and sort of my friends from college and grad school, my peers, feel like the bargain wasn't worth it and are feeling stressed and anxious, so like, oh, can I ever afford a house? Can I afford to have children? If we're feeling that way, then I think that's a kind of a canary in the coal mine. Because if you jump through every hoop and achieved and you're still feeling like the bargain isn't necessarily paying off, that's evidence of how bad things are deeper in the mind.
And I think that's be really angry, right. And all of you should be angry, and we should all be turning that anger into organized politics.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.